Hi class, this is Steve again. I'm here to do a mini lecture on Chapter 3, which is entitled Ethical Decision Making and Action. I'm not going to read a lot of the first part of it because the key part for you in this particular chapter is really the latter part of the chapter when it talks about the different ways to make ethical decisions. And I'm going to briefly cover those and then tell you what most people end up picking. These different ethical paradigms that are used to make decisions are all very logical. They make sense. And what happens is, though, most people use a combination of these when they make a decision, either consciously or subconsciously. They may not be aware that they're using these kinds of techniques. But one thing to remember, and one reason I'm going to go over these, is because in your papers, your Hallmark paper, you're going to be asked to describe how you made the decision. And you're going to use one of these paradigms that are listed that we're going to talk about tonight. Okay? So the first one is Kidder's ethical checkpoints. Kidder's, K-I-D-D-E-R-S, ethical checkpoints. This is on page 89 in your book. I'm sorry if I keep looking down, but I want to make sure that I'm looking at the right material here. Now this has 9 different steps, if you will, that you go through in order to make a decision. Now, personally, for me, that's a lot of steps to go through in order to make a decision. But when you're talking about the kinds of decisions that are being made, and these are all ethically oriented, then perhaps 9 isn't such a great number. But he talks about having these checkpoints, these 9 checkpoints, that begin with recognizing that there is a moral issue. Now, what we're talking about here is, in particular, isn't so much ethics in its truest sense, where we're talking about things like abortion or homosexuality or all the things that people want to talk about in an ethics course. This is more business ethics. So recognizing that there is a moral issue when it comes to work. It could be something as somebody's embezzling money. It could be that you have to decide whether or not you're going to be a whistleblower. Unfortunately, the University of Louisville right now is going through a difficult time, especially with the foundation itself. And so there's a lot of decision making that has to go on. But the first one is recognizing that there is a moral issue. It's not simply a business issue or a personal issue, but there is in fact a morality part to the question or to the issue at hand. And then he goes through these 9 points. I'm not going to read it to you. But the number 8 one is where you make the decision. So you go through these series of steps, and then you get to number 8, which is make the decision. And then number 9 is where you reflect on that decision and determine whether or not you think that was a good decision to have been made. So a 9-step process, solid, good, but the only thing that I would say against it is the fact that it is so long and involves many steps, which also means that there can be points of failure as well. So the next one he talks about, that's the first one. The next one he talks about is the Lonergan-Baird method. Now this is pretty straightforward. Lonergan-Baird were 2 guys who were philosophers, ethicists, and what they decided was, and I think this makes a lot of sense, was a 4-step process. And the first step on page 92 is to be attentive, consider what works and what doesn't work. Well, the only thing I would say about that is you really have to figure out what the problem is first. So to say what he's saying, consider what works and what doesn't, first you got to determine, in my opinion, what the problem is. But again, this is a simple 4-step process. So consider what works and what doesn't work. Second thing is sort through the data. So what's working, what's not working, look at the data, make a data-driven decision. Now that's one of the big things in my particular business besides teaching, but what I do is I work in online environments. My job is to basically manage a staff that helps EKU create online courses. And as part of that, sometimes we have to make some tough decisions, and so we try to make data-driven decisions. And this is what this is pointing to. Make your decisions based on the data that you have, not a gut feel, not emotions, but really data. Third step is evaluate the options. So you got the data together. Now, what options do you have in order to make this decision? Do you have A, B, C? Do you have A and B? Or do you just have one possible option? Sometimes these decisions become very complex and complicated. And as you think through and as you sift through the data, it becomes difficult to make a decision. And by evaluating the options, it hopefully gets your mindset in a more orderly fashion where you can determine, okay, if I do A, then this is what's going to happen, B, this is what's going to happen, etc. And number 4, I think, sounds a little silly, but it says act with courage. I suppose when you talk about moral issues, especially as they deal with the business place, sometimes you do have to act with courage. Long story, but a friend of mine, I'll abbreviate it, a friend of mine who was the CFO of a large organization in Louisville, a number of years ago was indicted for taking company money and basically playing the stocks with it, or playing the market with it. But he did that under the COO's and CEO's direct orders. So even though he knew it was wrong, he was doing it nevertheless. And when it came time for when they were caught and the FBI got involved, all of this kind of stuff, he had to act with courage, and his only option out was to basically tell the FBI what really happened. And there were death threats against him from the COO and CEO. It was just not a good situation, so he had to act with courage. Most of the issues that you and I would deal with in a workplace, although it may take some courage, it's not to that degree. But it may take getting over some awkwardness. It may take confronting a situation or a person that is difficult to deal with. It's never an easy thing to stand up for something that is right, because so often there are players in it that want to continue doing what they've been doing. So let me skip over to the next one, the moral compass. As you can imagine, a compass with 4 points. It talks about, will the action serve a worthwhile purpose? So you're already at a decision-making point, saying, as your very first step, does whatever you're going to do make sense? Is it a worthwhile purpose? The second one is the action consistent with relevant principles? I think they have that backwards, in my opinion. You'd think you would look at the relevant principles first before you would look at serving whatever action you're going to serve being a worthwhile purpose or not. It makes sense to me that you would figure out what your relevant principles are first, but that's the way they have it. The lens 3, or the third point in this moral compass, is, does the action respect the legitimate claims of the people likely to be affected? That goes without saying. The people in a moral situation, again, think about workplace scenarios. Typically it involves more than one person. Think, for example, of sexual harassment cases. As a matter of fact, I'll share this with you. This was really interesting. A person that works for me, a young lady, was walking down the hall the other day, and a superior of mine, not my direct boss, but one who's higher than that, called out to her in a way that I thought was inappropriate. He said, "Hey, girlfriend, Now, you think, well, that's pretty innocent, that's harmless, but you could tell it shook her a little bit. And later I went and talked to her and I said, you know, that could be considered harassment, particularly in the tone that he used. And she said, no, it's fine, I'm not going to worry about it. But in a real sense, I have an obligation to pursue that, and am still talking to her, but she's just said it didn't bother her, just let it go, it was no big deal. But I think in my case, because I'm her supervisor, that I have an obligation to tell her, or to tell Human Resources about the situation. I think it was totally inappropriate. And then finally, the fourth lens is, do we have the power to take this action? I can tell you, in people writing papers, writing their Hallmark assessments, almost no one uses this one. Now, you may very well choose to, so read carefully the details of it, and you may very well choose to use this. The Foursquare protocol is somewhat similar to the moral compass in the fact that there are 4 components to it. The close description of the situation, followed by gathering accumulated experience in similar situations. Well, the problem with that is many of us get into situations at work where there hasn't been something similar to it, or you're not familiar with it and you don't know really what to do about it. So that's the weakness, in my opinion, on that one. The third element is to recognize the significant distinctions between the current problem and the past ones. Again, you have to have had those kinds of experiences before it really matters. And finally, situating yourself to decide. Again, this is fine as far as making ethical decisions, but to me it's a bit overly complex when it doesn't necessarily have to be. And it's dependent upon the fact that you have to have had some kind of experience that was similar to that. Now, this next one and last one is the one that probably 90% of the people use, because it's really logically the way most of us think whenever we're faced with a problem or decision to be made. This is on page 96. It's called the 5I format. The 5I, the letter I format. And the reason is all five suggestions begin with the letter I. The first one is identify the problem. Well, this makes sense to me. Number 2, investigate the situation or the problem. Third, innovate by generating a variety of solutions. Fourth, isolate a solution. And fifth, implement the solution. To me, maybe because of my computer science background originally as an undergrad, maybe this is just appeals to me because it's so straightforward. Again, identifying the problem, investigating the problem, innovating, coming up with a number of solutions. Fourth, isolate a solution. And the last one is implementing the solution. This is the one that most people like because, quite frankly, most of us make decisions this way. We will do things like a pros and cons list. That's the generating a variety of solutions. And then we'll think, okay, we got more pros than cons for this one. This will be what we decide to do. Well, now apply all this to a workplace moral issue. Well, for example, a number of years ago I was teaching this class at Fort Knox, this same class. And there was a lady there in the class. This was a face-to-face class. And she absolutely did not like Walmart. A little bit later in this semester, you're going to watch a Walmart video that talks all about it and all of that. Anyway, I was holding a debate in the classroom, and she was so anti-Walmart that I, of course, put her on the pro-Walmart side and made her try to defend Walmart. She simply could not say a word. She didn't say a word. She took a 0 for participation because she couldn't say anything good about Walmart. She couldn't even say they had a good parking lot. There was nothing at all. But So she had identified the problem as being Walmart, that Walmart itself was an evil entity, and therefore there was nothing to be gained by talking about it. So she went through this 5I format. She identified the problem. The problem was Walmart. She investigated the problem. She knew all about the poor treatment of employees and how they hire just part-time people and all this other things. She innovated by generating a variety of solutions. Actually, she only had one solution, which goes to number 4, which was isolate a solution, and that is stay away from Walmart. Walmart is again evil, so I'll stay away from it, and then implement the solution. She never went to Walmart. So you can make your case for anything like that. It was pretty intense though, and I could never really truly figure out why she had such a chip on her shoulder about Walmart. I mean, you can dislike companies. I mean, for example, Dillard's is not one of the better companies to work for if you read the literature. The Natural Food Place, I can't think, my wife goes there. Whatever the Natural Food Place is, Whole Foods, yeah, it's Whole Foods. That's supposed to be a good place to work at. Starbucks has good things to say about, or there's good things to say about Starbucks. But regardless of whatever you feel about a certain company, it's really interesting that one would get so caught up in it that you would not be able to even say one thing positive about that entity. So anyway, that was a tangent. So really, I just really wanted to cover these decision-making formats because you're going to have to pick one of these during your Hallmark assessment and show, for example, if you choose Kidder's, and that's nine different checkpoints, you're going to have to list on there checkpoint 1, recognize there's a moral issue, and you'll have to explain that. Checkpoint 2, determine the actor. You'll have to put that in. All the way through 8 and 9, which is make the decision and then revisit the decision. So what I'm going to ask you to do in your papers is to pick one of these and then go through each step of that. That's why the 5I is so popular, because it's straightforward, it's simple, it makes sense, and in the case studies that you're going to be given for that, what you're going to find, I think, is that 5I works really well with any of the case studies that you might choose. Okay, well that's all for this week, and I hope you have a good week, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye.